And certainly people, the club day people, who are playing under vastly different circumstances.
Right. And for many employers, as opposed to those of us who
have one employer,
enjoy full-time or near
right.
full-time employment within orchestras.
Right. Which gives you an entirely different relationship.
Right.
Because you really depend far more on that one employer than anybody does who have a multitude of them.
Sure. And that probably brings us on to that subject of then investing some of our brain power and our interest in making sure that our employees are strong and that they have good futures ahead of us, which I think
Which is something that's come up in recent times because, yes. as the whole world knows, quote, orchestras are in trouble.
Yeah.
And that is a legitimate problem. Ticket sales aren't what they were. Interest in classical music and the culture at large is not what it once was. Yeah. Fundraising is more difficult. The choices that people who might buy tickets have multiplied just vastly.
Sure.
And
plus, if you wanted to consume classical music 40 years ago, if you were kind of advanced, you might have a stereo.
Right.
In the early 60s.
Right.
And so you would get this wonderful stereophonic two-channel sound. Of course, we know how far we've come in the last 40 years. If I want to consume classical music, I don't need to go hear the symphony.
You don't need to go hear the symphony, and you might decide to watch a movie at home, which is something that you couldn't have done 40 years ago.
Sure.
And that leads, as you were saying, to an atmosphere in which there is more cooperation between musicians and management, formerly at each other's throats in many occasions.
Right.
So this, I feel safe in asking you have been part of.
Yes, I have been a big part of that, actually. In the New Jersey Symphony, I began playing with the New Jersey Symphony in 1978, and I joined the orchestra in 1979, so I'm beginning my 27th year.
The New Jersey Symphony,
yes.
For people who may not know that, the New Jersey Symphony is not quite a full-time orchestra.
No.
How many weeks?
Well, we just went back to 32 weeks. We were at 35 weeks.
Which is one of those difficult negotiations.
It is.
Where I think it's something we should come back to.
Sure.
Where the musicians need to feel that this actually has to be done.
Yes.
And they're not being taken advantage of.
Right.
But then New Jersey is also in an interesting position because it represents the entire state and plays all over the state. And when you joined it, I think it played in many more places than it plays now.
When I joined, we did 17 different series in 16 different halls.
Oh my God.
And that was, it was 5 nights a week on the bus to various high school auditoriums somewhere in New Jersey. I lived in the city at the time, so it was through the tunnel and then wherever the bus was going.
There was that. Let me put it this way. Here's how I want to ask this question. Anybody can see the downside of all of that. What was the upside?
The upside was that you were really taking the music to where the people were.
Right.
And I think that still is our mission. We don't play in as many halls now. We're down to 7 halls.
Right.
But we're still the only major symphony orchestra in the country that does that much regular run-outs to our constituents.
And I've talked to musicians in your orchestra who have just exclaimed with a certain delight about how much the people in these orchestras love, in the audiences, love the music.
Yeah, yeah.
Which they wouldn't have coming to their communities if it wasn't for...
Or they may have it once a year,
yeah.
But they're not going to have 8 concerts coming through, and so they get the variety and the soloists that come along with that, so that's very special.
And of course now you also have that spectacular hall in Newark, NJPAC. Which
Wonderful
gives
place.
you, yeah, that is one of the treasures in the country, and it's not appreciated. And digression here, but I really want to say this. I've been to numerous concerts there. I'm just knocked out. And when new halls like the Kimmel Center opened in Philadelphia, and no disrespect for it, but everybody knows that there were problems with the acoustics and still are. You never had that.
We never had that.
That hall opened
from the beginning.
It was terrific.
Yeah.
And people forget that, and it's not mentioned anymore.
Yeah. It's a wonderful place to play.
One of the best places to play and hear music.
I think so too. And in my life, I've had the experience of playing in most of the major halls in Europe, and I think the Musikverein tops it. I think Boston Symphony Hall is better, but I don't know many other better halls that...
And I know that this opinion is shared not just by classical musicians, but by some of the pop acts that play there. Yeah. They also love it.
It's a wonderful facility.
Yeah. So this gives the orchestra a sense of empowerment, a sense that you really amount to something.
That was the big thing.
Yes.
That this peripatetic orchestra that had been on tour for all these years, finally 7 years ago, had a home, and we had lockers. And this meant an awful lot as an ensemble. Plus, at the time, our subscription audience tripled. And, you know, so it was really good times. We're talking about the cooperative nature of things, and the opening of the hall is actually a good example.
Which was what year?
Oh, yeah. I think we're in our 7th season now, so we got to back up. It was probably 1997, 98 season, if that sounds about right.
That makes sense, yeah.
But that would be a perfect opportunity for the musicians to strike. What you know, the opening of this brand new hall, there were television broadcasts and everything. What a time to hold the management hostage.
Because you had a contract negotiation.
Yeah, the contract was up. And instead of that approach, we, as musicians, decided, or certainly our committee decided, why don't we negotiate this contract early, so that's not an issue. That to give even more of a boost to the orchestra, if we settle a contract that overbridges that opening, that's going to give the institution a lot more credibility.
And this was the musicians' idea?
It was the musicians' committee idea that just said, let's do this early negotiation.
And what possessed you to decide to do that?
I think New Jersey, it's you know, we're trying to do something that perhaps really shouldn't be done, and that is to have a symphony sandwiched between the New York Philharmonic and the Philadelphia Orchestra. If people living in New Jersey want great music, there are two great orchestras on either end of the, just cross one river and you're there for either of those. However, about over 80 years ago, someone had the great idea of having a New Jersey Symphony, and we are now in a position where I think we had a responsibility to the state. We had a responsibility to our audiences, and we had a responsibility to our future to make the labor thing not an issue here. Okay,
but I'm still going to push you on this because very often when that happens, there is some implicit gun over everybody's head. I think that's a mixed metaphor, but let it stand. But you know what I mean. The cooperation between management and musicians now is, to a great extent, motivated by the problems that the industry is having, and everybody understands that this is not the time to be at each other's throats. Was there anything comparable?
Yeah, let's back up. There's no gun here. That's really important. But several years prior to this opening of the hall, we had a situation where we had no contract. We were going through half the season in play and talk mode, which means that you keep working under the old agreement because you have not agreed on the new one. And we weren't getting anywhere at this time. And one of the strategies that we employed was to have every musician in the orchestra write personal letters to all the board members, basically saying, at the time, there was a 47% cut in pay on the table as their final best offer. And of course that was going to seriously impact everyone in the orchestra. So our strategy was to have everybody write the letters and see if that helped. We ended up settling the contract for a 17% cut and thought we'd achieved a great victory. Of course, interesting how that dynamic works. But the one thing that came out of it was, of all those letters we sent, only one person answered every letter, a member of the board, who wrote a handwritten reply to every single person who wrote to him and said, I understand, thank you for sharing, I will do our best. And